This is Chapter 4 of Tom Sawyer Abroad. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Tom Sawyer Abroad, by Mark Twain. Chapter 4. Storm. And it got lonesomer and lonesomer. There was the big sky up there, empty and awful deep, and the ocean down there without a thing on it but just the waves. All around us was a ring, where the sky and the water come together. Yes, a monstrous big ring it was, and we right in the dead center of it, plumb in the center. We was racing along like a prairie fire, but it never made any difference. We couldn't seem to git past that center no way. I couldn't see that we ever gained an inch on that ring. It made a body feel creepy, it was so curious and unaccountable. Well, everything was so awful still that we got to talking in a very low voice, and kept on getting creepier and lonesomer and less talky, till at last the talk ran dry altogether, and we just set there and thunk, as Jim calls it, and never said a word the longest time. The professor never stirred till the sun was overhead. Then he stood up and put a kind of triangle to his eye, and Tom said it was a sextant, and he was taking the sun to see whereabouts the balloon was. Then he ciphered a little, and looked in a book, and then he begun to carry on again. He said lots of wild things, and amongst others, he said he would keep up this 100-mile gait till the middle of tomorrow afternoon, and then he'd land in London. We said we would be humbly thankful. He was turning away, but he whirled around when we said that, and give us a long look of his blackest kind, one of the maliciousest and suspiciousest looks I ever see, and then he says, "You want to leave me. Don't try to deny it." We didn't know what to say, so we held in and didn't say nothing at all. He went aft and set down, but he couldn't seem to get that thing out of his mind. Every now and then he would rip out something about it and try to make us answer him, but we dasn't. It got lonesomer and lonesomer right along, and it did seem to me I couldn't stand it. It was still worse when night begun to come on. By and by Tom pinched me and whispers, "Look." I took a glance aft, and see the professor taking a wet out of a bottle. I didn't like the looks of that. By and by he took another drink, and pretty soon he begun to sing. It was dark now, and getting black and stormy. He went on singing, wilder and wilder, and the thunder begun to mutter, and the wind to wheeze and moan among the ropes, and altogether it was awful. It got so black we couldn't see him any more, and wished we couldn't hear him, but we could. Then he got still, but he warn't still 10 minutes till we got suspicious, and wished he would start up his noise again so we could tell where he was. By and by there was a flash of lightning, and we see him start to get up, but he staggered and fell down. We heard him scream out in the dark, "They don't want to go to England. All right, I'll change the course. They want to leave me, I know they do. Well, they shall, and now." I most died when he said that. Then he was still again, still so long I couldn't bear it, and it did seem to me the lightning wouldn't ever come again. But at last there was a blessed flash, and there he was on his hands and knees, crawling, and not 4 feet from us. My, but his eyes was terrible. He made a lunge for Tom and says, "Overboard you go!" But it was already pitch dark again, and I couldn't see whether he got him or not, and Tom didn't make a sound. There was another long, horrible wait. Then there was a flash, and I see Tom's head sink down outside the boat and disappear. He was on the rope ladder that dangled down in the air from the gunwale. The professor let off a shout and jumped for him, and straight off it was pitch dark again, and Jim groaned out, "Po' Mars Tom, he's gone," and made a jump for the professor, but the professor warn't there. Then we heard a couple of terrible screams, and then another not so loud, and then another that was way below, and you could only just hear it, and I heard Jim say, "Po' Mars Tom." Then it was awful still, and I reckon a person could 'a' counted 4,000 before the next flash came. When it come, I see Jim on his knees, with his arms on the locker and his face buried in them, and he was crying. Before I could look over the edge it was all dark again, and I was glad, because I didn't want to see. But when the next flash come, I was watching, and down there I see somebody a swinging in the wind on the ladder. and it was Tom. "Come up!" I shouts. "Come up, Tom!" His voice was so weak, and the wind roared so, I couldn't make out what he said, but I thought he asked was the professor up there. I shouts, "No, he's down in the ocean. Come up. Can we help you?" Of course, all this in the dark.
Huck, who is you hollerin' at?"
I'm hollering at Tom.
"Oh, Huck, how can you act so when you know poor Mars Tom—"
Then he let off an awful scream, and flung his head and his arms back and let off another one, because there was a white glare just then, and he had raised up his face just in time to see Tom's, as white as snow, rise above the gunwale and look him right in the eye. He thought it was Tom's ghost, you see. Tom clumb aboard, and when Jim found it was him and not his ghost, he hugged him and called him all sorts of loving names, and carried on like he was gone crazy, he was so glad. Says I, "What did you wait for, Tom? Why didn't you come up at first?" "I dasn't, Huck. I knowed somebody plunged down past me, but I didn't know who it was in the dark. It could 'a' been you. It could 'a' been Jim." That was the way with Tom Sawyer, always sound. He weren't coming up till he knowed where the professor was. The storm let go about this time with all its might, and it was dreadful the way the thunder boomed and tore, and the lightning glared out, and the wind sung and screamed in the rigging, and the rain come down. One second you couldn't see your hand before you, and the next you could count the threads in your coat sleeve, and see a whole wide desert of waves pitching and tossing through a kind of veil of rain. A storm like that is the loveliest thing there is, but it ain't at its best when you are up in the sky and lost, and it's wet and lonesome, and there's just been a death in the family. We set there huddled up in the bow and talked low about the poor professor, and everybody was sorry for him, and sorry the world had made fun of him and treated him so harsh, when he was doing the best he could and hadn't a friend nor nobody to encourage him and keep him from brooding his mind away and going deranged. There was plenty of clothes and blankets and everything at the other end, but we thought we'd rather take the rain than go meddling back there. End of chapter 4.